Martin, do we need to set the chat to everyone?
Sorry, the chat is it's open to everybody.
Right, okay, fine.
It already is. Oh, I see what you mean. It says hosts and panelists, you mean?
Yeah, I didn't know whether that was or whether you needed to do the everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this session on advancing disability inclusion in tertiary education. In this session, we will be presenting and discussing research into the experience of international students with disabilities and sharing their recommendations for building more inclusive environments. My name's Martin Hope, and I'm the Global Head of Tertiary Education Partnerships at the British Council. And I'm going to introduce the panellists for today's meeting, for today's session. First of all, Professor Carol Evans, the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education and Student Experience at the University of Salford. Carol is a global leader in research-informed pedagogy and disability inclusion. Carol is going to present the findings of the research that we did among the international alumni with disabilities. We're then going to hear from Fadla Bader, who is an alumna of Nottingham Trent University, a business owner at Gesiret in Algeria, and a committee member of the Disability Inclusion Community of Practice for Alumni. Warm welcome to Fadla. And then we're going to hear from Maurie van den Heever, who is an information management system coordinator at GoodX software in South Africa. And he's an alumnus of Heriot-Watt University. And he is also a committee member of the Disability Inclusion Community of Practice for Alumni. So just a bit of housekeeping first. The live captioning is available through the Show Captions button on the toolbar at the bottom of your screens. You can put general comments in the chat, and you can put questions in the Q&A. And we'll be taking questions after the three panelists have spoken. The resources from the session, including Carol's presentation and the research that we did and the tips from alumni for new students thinking of going to the UK to study, will be available in the resources section. So that's all from me. I'll now hand over to Professor Carol Evans for the presentation. Carol, over to you.
Okay, I'm just checking. Can I get a hands up that you can hear me? Can somebody tell me whether you can all hear me?
We can hear you clearly,
Nice
Carol.
one. Thank you. I'm sorry I've got a bit of flu at the moment, so hopefully it'll be okay. Welcome to everybody that's come to this webinar. We're really pleased to interact with you today. I'm going to now ask if my slides can be put up so that we can start sharing those. Again, I'm hoping that everybody is able to see the slides now on the screen. Nice one. Okay, so let's make a start. So I'm going to talk a little bit in the next 15 minutes about some of the headline issues from the survey that we did, and hopefully maybe with some of you that completed this survey. And if you did, we're very grateful for your inputs into that. If we move to the next slide. Maurie, one of our speakers today, also was very much involved in this research, and we did produce a piece for Times Higher, and I've put the link to the report about how can higher education better support international students with disability, which links to the work done on supporting students coming in to university, through and out, and also that tips from alumni that Martin alluded to. So please do look at that. Another source of British Councils is the report on disability inclusion in the UK, which also integrates some of the key findings from the international alumni. As we thought these were an important group that should be more centre stage in the work we do. So again, moving to the next slide, please. Really important thing for us is the fact that there are very few studies that actually look at international students with disabilities experiences of higher education. My argument would be that international students with disabilities are very much the litmus test of how inclusive universities are, or not, as the case may be. But there is a significant lack of work in this space that has the voice of international students with disabilities. There's also very little research on the postgraduate experience. And given that most international students with disabilities are postgraduates, masters and PhD, that also is amplified. There's also a lack of research and data on the implication of government policy changes on the experiences of students with disabilities, especially given visa changes and the impact of not being able to bring dependents into the UK. It'll be interesting to know what the impacts of that are on the number of students coming into the UK with disabilities, given those changes in policy. If I move to the next slide. If I look at the sample that we used, we did this pilot study, which was very niche, 72, but those 72 provided very detailed quantitative and qualitative responses. So we're able to glean a lot of information from our colleagues. Just to note, I've just put a bit of a summary about who those were that contributed to our survey. They came from 27 countries, but predominantly from Nigeria, Pakistan, and India. They attended 42 universities, approximately 40% being the Russell Group, predominantly education, business, and health related. Most were postgraduate, of which a lot were master students, and nearly 40% had studied in the last 5 years. So there was currency in their experiences as well. So that was the group that gave us feedback. And now I'm just going to summarize some of the key findings. Please do go and look at the detailed resources and the summary reports on this for more of the background detail. If we move to the next slide, please. I'm mentioning a few things here. So one of them is the difficulties in transitioning into higher education. Roughly about 50% of international students with disabilities were contacted prior to coming to their universities by their disability support teams. So 50% were, and that made a significant difference to how those students experienced higher education. Many of our students said it wasn't that there wasn't support available, the support was plentiful, but navigating the complexity of it was really difficult, and also knowing how to leverage systems in the UK was not as transparent as they thought it could be. It was also noteworthy that 75% of this group of respondents said that at no point in their time within higher education study in the UK were they asked what could be done to enhance their learning and teaching experience given their disabilities, which is quite a startling statistic. If we move to the next slide, please. Again, if I take really high level things, is the notion of cultural challenge. Roughly, well, 48%, if I say under 50%, 48% disclosed a disability. Why not more? Many students in their responses argued they didn't know what the implications of disclosing meant in terms of the impact of them on them. And if they had known from the outset, they would have been more likely to have disclosed. Others disclosed much later on in the process, but obviously missed out on those important supports at point of transition in, which is absolutely critical. Key things that we found was the culture shock in the difference between how disability inclusion is perceived in the UK compared to their countries that students were coming from. But that culture shock wasn't one way. There was also culture shock of going back when they exited university and went into employment in different countries in terms of not being able to necessarily have the levels of support that they had while they were in the UK and having to transition back, where actually their whole identity and ways of being had significantly moved on and have adapted to now then adapt back. Quite a few colleagues talked about the difficulties of navigating the new setting and an identity and what their identity was in one system and another system, and having to flip between different identities in different countries or in different contexts and or with different groups of people in different parts of the university. So the cultural challenge is absolutely enormous, especially around notions of language in terms of access and support and what was available. If we move to the next slide, please. As the sample were very argued that they had very high levels of self-advocacy. And if you look at the employment opportunities and directions of travel of the alumni, they are a very high self-advocating group that completed this survey. So I'm saying this group perceive themselves to be very effective self-advocates. Many of them have started up companies supporting other people. However, in a completely different context, it was quite difficult for them to advocate because they didn't know what was available. And they were saying, whilst it might have been common knowledge to UK individuals, it certainly wasn't to those that were coming in from overseas. And trying to navigate all of those different systems, trying to work out the language of what things meant and didn't mean, and do all of the work all at one time is massive overload at point of entry. And many suggested they needed a transition phase at the beginning of their courses to be able to access the assistive technologies, to work out how university systems worked, rather than feeling thrown into it. But especially those that were coming for 1 year, the amount of pressure to get up to speed really quickly is phenomenal. Helped if one already had contacts at that university, but made much more difficult if you were navigating that space on your own. And it was even difficult for those that had already studied in the UK, but had come back to study something different in a different university. So again, universities are actually quite different in the way in the UK that they're managing this. Okay, if we move to the next slide, please. I mentioned in the previous slide about self-advocacy skills, and this is the ability to know what's available, be able to advocate for your rights, have a voice, get your needs realised. But as I said, if you don't know what's available, then you don't know how to advocate for it. And a lot of our students were involved in advocacy work, over 76%. But 88% did not receive any training on how best to advocate for their needs in the university system in the UK. Now, this is an important point, especially as many students highlighted bias in their experiences of disability inclusion. So those with hidden disabilities said they found it much more difficult to access support, academic support. Students with mental health conditions found it very difficult to access academic support and accommodation needs. And visual and hearing impaired students found it incredibly difficult to integrate and access social networks and communities. And particular barriers that they acknowledged were actually student disability networks and student unions were actually quite difficult to navigate when they wanted those connected international global experiences and work internships and all of those kind of things. So again, if I was summarizing, the key points that came from our respondents was learning how to advocate in a different context is actually really hard, even if you're good at this, because you have to know what's available to know how to advocate for it. And also being able to shift to what identity in what context. And for many, disclosing was too big a risk. So they would forego support because of that need for privacy and self-reliance, as not wanting to go outside family for support. And training and being able to access networks and special support would have been wanted far a lot more by our respondents. If I move to the next slide, please. If I summarized all of this up, one key message that came from this work about creating a more inclusive university system is really, how do we support the heavy lifting of all those with disabilities? And as I've put on this diagram, there's a diagram of lots of hexagons here, and I've put in the middle this notion of shared advocacy. And what I mean by that is that the university needs to actually create an environment where individuals do not have to advocate for their own needs, that is minimized because the environment doesn't require disclosure, because those supports are there from the get-go. That's what we should be aiming for, so that reasonable adjustments are embedded in curriculum and in assessment, and we don't have to fight for those individual requirements. So I've put there, how do we support individuals to actually understand, also understanding of your own needs and own requirements within different spaces, because it's very easy to become unhinged in different situations. Awareness of rights was something our international community wanted more understanding of, and also confidence building in knowing how to advocate in systems that were quite different. But universities, as I've put in a darker colour on the right, which is a darker brown, was about universities need to be upfront from the get-go about what are the implications of disclosure. If you were asking somebody to disclose a disability, what are the implications of doing that? Who needs to know? How will that information be used? How will that be a benefit to you? What supports can you therefore access? Those are really critical questions that somebody would need to know at point of entry. 23% of students felt discriminated by lecturers because of the nature of their disability and didn't feel that that was accommodated, but didn't have a voice really to be able to express that. I've put there about, again, awareness of supports and access to inclusive learning environments, and how do we invest in training and also engage international students with disabilities in helping to design inclusive learning environments, so they actually play a key role in looking at what those barriers to entry are. If I move to the next slide. Ways forward in terms of summarising where we are. I've argued that the key thing that came out of the report was supporting the development of advocacy skills while building more inclusive cultures. Better understanding is needed of disability inclusion needs, and at nuance levels where we're looking at the intersectionalities of different characteristics. We're not defined purely by our disabilities. We also and many of us are not defined by our disability at all. But the fact of the matter is there are loads of factors that impact how we navigate spaces and access resources. And also, one of the key points which one of our speakers will pick up on is that 23% of the international students with disabilities, 23% of our students with disability, international students with disabilities, found it very hard to have a job. That they didn't have a job after 18 months, and the difficulties of transitioning out. One point I haven't put on this slide is the importance of employment specialist support, internship opportunities to support that transition out, especially for students with visual and hearing impairments. Absolutely critical. I've also said, as a part of this work, working very closely with international students with disabilities, we're able to firm up really focused questions, 21 questions, which are really powerful, that could be used further to do some really groundbreaking work in this area if there was interest in that. Let's move to the last slide, I think, which is just basically, here is a link to the pilot report, and Martin's also put these up on the internal site, and the appendices around the checklist. I would urge you all to look at the checklist, which Maurie and colleagues have contributed to, which is a great piece of work. And also, there's a link to the Disability Inclusion Framework, and also the survey item. If you would like to look at it, I can send that to you. That's available to anybody to use in their own institution. And I will stop at that point and thank everybody for listening. Okay.
Carol, thank you very much. That was a brilliant summary of the findings, and so clear about transition into tertiary education, the experience while students with disability there, and then transitioning out. And all those resources you've generously made available, all of the audience and wider groups of people interested can access those. And thank you also, Carol, because you are not well today, and so you have influenza. So all the more reason to be grateful for all of your work to support a disability inclusion. And Carol's framework for disability inclusion is actually being adopted in countries such as Pakistan and Indonesia, where through the British Council partnerships, we are sharing some of this work with our international partners. Well, now it's time to listen to the experience of two of our international alumni and members of our disability inclusion community of practice. And first, I'm going to turn to Phila Bader, who is an alumna of Nottingham Trent University, where she completed a master's degree in entrepreneurship and innovation. As well as running her family business in Algeria, she's building a platform focused on disability inclusion, feminism, and the experiences of underrepresented communities. Her work centres on advocacy, storytelling, and challenging stigma to build more inclusive and accessible environments for all. And Phila, you're going to start with a short story and then talk about your experience through education. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martin. Hello, everyone. My name is Phila Bader, and I'm from Algeria. And today I'm going to share something a little bit different. It's actually a story I wrote a long time ago about a girl. It's a girl who always sat by herself in the corner of the classroom. A girl who always smiled when others smiled, even when she didn't understand the joke. A girl who always nodded her head, even when she had no idea what the lesson was about. A girl who got bullied by both students and teachers. A girl who never had friends, not because she didn't want to socialize, but because she was never included. So silence and isolation became her best companion. A deaf girl from a busy city like Algiers, who had big dreams and who also wanted, same opportunities as anyone else, and that girl was me. So now let me take you back to a few years ago when I arrived in the UK. I had the excitement, you know, every student has, but mine were mixed with fear and confusion, and the pressure of entering a new world I didn't know how to navigate. I didn't know how the system worked, who to talk to, and where to start when it came to accessibility. And as an international student with a disability is like navigating two journeys at the same time, adapting to a new country while also carrying the same struggles and facing them every day and everywhere you go. So the first months obviously were overwhelming. I spent a lot of time, you know, hiding my disability. I didn't want to speak about my disability because you might ask me why. Because when you come from a society that forced you to hide your disability, you will automatically carry the same mentality. So that's exactly what happened with me when I first arrived. But staying silent actually didn't help. Um, so I slowly started opening up, and of course, with the help of my mentor, who helped me to step outside of my comfort zone, and pushed me to be open about my disability, especially in front of my classmates. And it wasn't easy, but I did it, and I even contacted the disability support department in the university, and surprisingly, the person responsible was also a disabled man. So I felt, you know, the instant connection, and I also felt less alone, and I wasn't, you know, alone in my journey. So and even my social life actually flourished. I started making friends and be open about, you know, about my disability, and even my friends were really patient with me. So I realized one thing actually, that universities do want to help, and I didn't have to navigate university alone. But I'm not saying that everything was perfect. No, there were moments where communication failed, for example, and even technology failed. And sometimes when people forgot to turn their cameras on, and that was especially during COVID, when suddenly everything moved online, and we had to, you know, it was challenging. It was really challenging. We had to adapt, and also it was actually the first time experiencing what inclusion really looked like in real life, not only in theory but in practice as well. um, so that's why so my experience actually was a mix of progress and gaps, a mix of opportunity, but also exhaustion. So if I'm here today, because I believe in using lived experience in preventing other students from going through the same process and struggles. Yeah, and if I have something to say as I finish, I would address and I'll speak to the international student, and especially students with disabilities. Um, don't wait like I did, um, and you just have to take the first step. If it's the IELTS exam, then start preparing for the IELTS exam. or if it's the visa, then get your visa done. Or if it's reaching universities, start emailing them right now. It's all about the baby steps, and yeah, if I could do it with all the struggles, insecurities, and fears, I'm sure that many others could do it as well. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Fidela. Thank you so much for telling your story and giving advice, and the mentorship that you talked about that was important to you. I'm sure that you will be a fantastic mentor and already are for students who are having to face the same challenges. I'm sure everybody found that very, very useful. And what we're aiming to do through our community of practice is to be advocates, to support new students, but also to advise universities on how they can address some of the issues that Phila raised there, and develop these self-advocacy skills that is mentioned as one of the key findings in the report. So thank you very much again, Phila, and we'll hear from you again later when we open up the conversation. But now I'm going to turn to Maurie van den Heever, who is an information management system coordinator at GoodX software in South Africa, and holds an MBA from Edinburgh Business School, Heriot-Watt University. Maurie has been an incredibly active member of our alumni community of practice, and his objective is to empower people with disabilities in advancing their education, with a particular focus, though, on transitioning into employment, drawing on his own experience with brain damage and epilepsy. So I'm going to now hand over to Maurie, who's going to talk about developing employability skills and other things. Over to you, Maurie.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to meet you all. Good day. So like Martin said, I'm Maurie. So just a short background. I actually have severe brain damage, and I'm also physically disabled, and also have had to overcome a lot of physical challenges to be able to succeed in my life. And completing my studies was challenging, but once completed, transitioning into employment, actually finding employment, proved to be a monumentous task, as I found it very difficult to secure employment, partly due to a down economy, but also due to, I believe, uncertainty, and yes, I'll have to disclose, in some cases, discrimination from potential employers based on my disability. But I did manage to find employment at the software company, GoodX Software, and I've held various positions there, including as an administrator, as a project manager, and now also as a information management system coordinator. I was also a project manager in software development. But during the course of my career and throughout the different positions that I held so far, there were certain skills that I needed to learn, employability skills, and these skills are of critical importance to any person or alumnus of disabilities, alumna, if you want to find employment, and also once in employment, advance your career, grow your career, and earn a proper living for yourself. So basically, to touch upon that, once you've graduated, transitioning into employment is it can be quite a monumentous task, like I said. Basically, for starters, I would recommend, do your research, engage with your alumni, engage with your university, about the latest trends in interview preparation, in interviews, how interviews are conducted. Also, setting up resumes and CVs. These days, employers rarely look at a CV that's longer than 1.5 pages. So preferably keep your CV to 1.5 pages, and also use a quadrant format, like your skills on one side of the page and your experience on the other side, and so on. So, and like I said, engage with your alumni. You can find a lot of information on CV trends on platforms like LinkedIn, and also with your university's employability service. I believe I can't speak about each university in the UK, but most universities these days have employability services where they guide graduating students in setting up CVs, LinkedIn profiles, bonding networks, interview preparation, and the types of skills that are required. So basically, just to focus on the skills, there's a strong emphasis in employment by employers today on soft skills and on critical employability skills, and also on some hard truths of employment. Now, I would recommend you, mentorship is critical. If you find employment, find yourself a mentor, ask for mentorship from your manager, ask if you need assistive supports, like any assistive support you need, ask for a mentor. But when it comes to what employers want to see, there are a few harsh truths. For starters, employers always want to see any employee, regardless of disability, that is willing to go the extra mile, put in extra effort, put in additional hours, working hard, staying motivated, ability to work independently. Employees must have a high level of integrity, doing what's right always, even when no one is watching. And also a few hard truths. Employers want to see discipline, and employers want to see sacrifice. By sacrifice, I mean self-sacrifice. I mean, for example, you will find it's not always possible to take leave, for example, whenever you want. I mean, look, I was a software project manager, and if you're in the project management field, you essentially work the schedule of a project. So you have to plan your leave in advance. You really have to be disciplined and keeping the project on track. And then also, in terms of discipline, I mean, really, show up to work, be punctual. I know it's very difficult at times. You may feel tired. You may have conditions related to disability, but press on, wake up in the morning, stay motivated, set your alarm, be punctual, go to work. If your employer requires a lawful return to office mandate, please obey that mandate. Show up to the office if needed. And also, there's a strong emphasis by employers today in respect to interpersonal communication and inter-team collaboration. Employers want to see an employee that can work with other people, that can engage with other people, that can follow up and can be assertive at times, and also an employee who is highly emotionally intelligent, that is being aware of your emotions, and also recognizing the emotions of others and controlling your emotions, not having anger outbursts, staying calm but firm in intense situations, and then also, very importantly, accountability. Employers want to see accountability. And I'll say honestly as well, even if you make a mistake, let's say I make a very big mistake, don't hide it. If it's of a serious nature and it's really an honest mistake, call your supervisor or manager immediately and explain to them what happened and discuss it and work through it. I mean, yes, you might get a reprimand, but I mean, a reprimand is much better and you will give an opportunity to learn as if you try to hide it and you end up getting dismissed. So, and also a last piece of advice from my side, if time allows, Martin. This may sound controversial, coming where I'm coming from. Obviously, never hide your disability from any prospective employer. Disclose it when asked and when needed, but also, I'll add, where possible, disclose it at the right time. What I mean is, if possible, if you're not asked, don't disclose your disability too early in your application process, because you don't know who is looking at your application and your CV that early on. Some employers may ask you to disclose it up front, then you have to. But if I do not ask, it's best not to state on your CV or in your initial application if not required. Once you are in your interview and call for interview, you can then disclose it. Because if you disclose it too early, if you're not asked, it may potentially open up the door for discrimination, as you don't know who works with your initial application. So it's a bit of a juggle there. And like I said, this is my personal opinion as a disabled person. That may not be true. Like I said, do not hide your disability, but try to disclose it at the right time. That's from my side, Martin.
Thank you very much, Maurie. Really sound advice there for everybody looking for employment and while in employment as well. And I'm sure everybody will have learnt a lot from you sharing your experience there. So those are the initial presentations. Thank you to all of you for those. So we're going to move now on to questions, and we've got quite a few questions in the Q&A. Thank you everybody for those. And the first one I think I want to ask is around this question of disclosure, because it's a question that's raised by Carol around low disclosure and fear of disclosure, and Maurie, you've come in there and talked about disclosure, and Anonna in the questions and answers from Bangladesh has said, is there a process to assess whether an international student falls under disability? And the reason for asking is that in some countries, only serious physical disabilities assessed, and there are few to rare practices to assess other types of disability. So there's two parts to this. There's what counts as a disability, and then there is disclosure and the pros and cons of disclosure. So I'm going to turn to Carol first to respond to that, and then I'll come to Phila and Maurie.
Yeah, in the university, I totally concur with Maurie in terms of interviews and not disclosing too early, or actually saying too much about that, because you can be discriminated against before you get to interview. The issue about universities, I think all the guidance from the alumni would be disclose, 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 that it is a very safe thing to do in the UK context, but an international student with disabilities needs to be made to feel comfortable in order to feel that they can do that. But there is a lot of support available. And, we're in a context where in England, if we take international and UK students, 19% disclose a disability. In my own university, over 27% of our students disclose with a disability, which I think is absolutely marvelous, to be quite honest, that they feel able to do so. If you don't, then the university cannot put the supports in place. The other question you raised was around, there are different disabilities and different ways they're categorized or even validated in different countries. In the UK, the only issue is you're not supported by the government disability students allowance, which goes to UK students. So if you wanted to have a test to check whether you have a particular learning difficulty or something like that, that may be a charge to you. But it may still be worth you having that, because the university will still make available to you a vast array of support services and put you in contact with people. Because one reason why some students didn't disclose in our survey said was they didn't realize till they finished their studies they actually they did have a long-standing disability, but hadn't been recognized in their own country. So I think I totally get why one would be worried about disclosing. And I admit in my life, I've gone through not disclosing. I can't tolerate light. My brain is pretty mashed up. But I mean, I've had to be in situations where I've brain damage where I've had to disclose. The world is very different for visible and invisible disabilities, and I get it. And you have to be comfortable in your own skin to feel that it's safe for you to disclose at that point. And I respect anybody that doesn't want to disclose as well, because at the end of the day, one has to protect one's sense of self. But it is down to us as universities to make it safe for you to disclose and clarify what the implications of that is. But I think your predecessors, any of the alumni in our survey would say, please do disclose early because you miss out on so much if you don't. But it is a personal decision to make, and it's a tough one. It's not straightforward.
Thank you, Carol. Fidela, over to you on this question.
For me, I would say the same thing as Professor Carol. It's start with disclose your disability, because I know sometimes it feels uncomfortable, but support only works if universities know what you need. And it's the same thing that happened with me. If I didn't reach the disability service, I wouldn't get any support. And especially when I always go back to COVID during the pandemic when we had to study online. It was very much easier when I let everyone else know about my situation. They even supported me. They checked on me privately, especially when my mental health started declining during that time. And I'm sure it's the same case was with everybody else. So it's really important. And also, I would also say your disability is not a burden. And even asking for adjustment, it's not an extra work. It's your right, and you deserve to be supported. So yeah, disclose early. And also, the second point is build relationship with disability services, as I said, and academic mentors, and even one or two classmates, because we already know that being a disabled international student, it's already isolating experience, so you don't have to do it alone. So it's really better to get support and connection. So yeah.
Thank you, Fidela. Maurie, do you want to add something to that?
Not exactly, but like I said, that depends on you as a person. But yeah, like I said, personally, I would suggest not disclosing your disability too early to a potential employer.
Thank you. So I've got another question from the audience, which is a student who had a disability and an anonymous attendee was studying in China as a master's student. I have disability and a disability certificate and all the required documentation, but the university refused to register me as a disabled student. What can we do if we face this kind of situation? There's a practical example. Obviously, we don't know the details of that, but that's the kind of thing that could come up. So, Carol, any suggestions for what somebody does in that kind of situation?
Well, the thing I would do in that situation again is universities have student unions. And as I said, I think Fela mentioned this point as well about networks. You are not alone and don't feel that you have to be. I would go and get support from the student union and also find out, well, why? What is it in your application that doesn't meet the requirements of a disability? I mean, in the UK, we have the Equality Act. Look at the Equality Act. What's covered in the Equality Act? Be able to demonstrate why you actually do have a particular condition that is actually covered by that, because as Fella said, that's a legal responsibility of all institutions in the UK, that we need to ensure that we do look after those with protected characteristics, of which disability is central to that. So I think I would ask for help and get some and actually try and get a meeting for somebody to sit down with you and explain why your application isn't relevant, or what information would you have needed instead. It's very easy to be deflated and give up and knocked back by these things. And that goes back to agency about Maurie mentioned this point. We have to be pretty resilient. We have to kind of take the blows, but we have to get up and get up and get up. And you have to fight for it. And it's very hard when you're feeling really down and the barriers are all against you. But if you get the networks behind you, get the Students' Union behind you to actually support you, that would be helpful. Or a peer, another friend to come with you and now say, can I have an appointment? Can I have some time, 15 minutes of your time, online, face to face? Can we talk this through? And rather than accept it, don't accept things, just go and ask for the explanation, because you need an answer as to why. And I don't think you have that.
Thank you, Carol. Philip, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, because that question is really important, because it made me remember the first day when I arrived to the UK. I didn't have any certificate or any letter from the doctor. I only had my audiogram about my deafness. And when I went to the disability service, when I met the person, when I showed him the chart, and I told him this is only what I have got, and then he said, yeah, and that's enough, and this is enough because it shows everything. And he immediately started emailing my other academic tutors and letting them know about my severe situation, that I actually require adjustment and help in the classroom. So yeah, this is my experience, and yeah. And I still remember, yeah, so it wasn't easy. I was terrified, to be fair, but the only audiogram I had, and it worked really fine. So I hope that helped. Yeah, in mute. You're in mute, sorry.
That's a really good learning point, is to go and ask for help, and positive story certainly there about what happened. And the legal basis is important. If you need to, then there are student unions in the UK that you can go to for support. Maurie, do you want to add anything on that question of what to do if you're not recognised or your disability isn't somehow taken into consideration? You're on mute, Maurie, I think.
This is a difficult one to advise on, as the context is quite difficult, but what I can suggest is work on your motivational skills and your advocacy skills. In other words, don't just provide the documentation stating that you are disabled. State and explain what exactly your needs are, what your limitations are, and what you require. In addition to the documentation, so that you can convince the university board or the Chancellor, or who's in control of the admissions, as to motivate as to why you require this assistance and what limitations your disability has on you. So that, yes, because that's the best. Like I said, you have to be resilient. Like Carol said, you're gonna get situations like that, and once university is a good example there. But like I said, you will find that as well at potential employers as well. So I believe your motivational skills is as important as the documentation factually stating that you are a person with disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maurie, for that. Now, we're coming towards the end of the session now, everybody. Unfortunately, we're not able to cover all of the questions, but we will try to answer them all afterwards and put that in the resources. I just want to ask a question to the panelists about this community of practice that we've set up. And Phila and Maurie, your steering committee members. Carol, you've advised us throughout on this whole process of setting the community up, what the terms of reference should be, and you will be alongside us throughout the journey. What do you think we can achieve through this community of practice of UK alumni? We've already produced a fantastic summary of tips for students new international students coming to the UK. We hope to be able to influence institutions. What more can we do as a network, and how can the audience today also get involved? I'm going to ask you to nominate yourself. Who wants to come forward first to answer that question? Just a few lines on what we can do through this network.
Right.
Well,
Oh, go on, Maurie. Maurie, you go first.
No, you can go first, Carol. No problem.
We have a vast range of international students with disabilities who've walked those steps like Fella and Maurie. I would love it if we could capitalise on that network to act as mentors for students going through that system in the UK and create that. I think also better understanding of the lived experiences of international students with disabilities across different universities in the UK. I think there is more research that we could be doing on that, because I don't think the voice is there, and I think there's capacity to do that. But I think it's how we build a supportive network and resources, especially around some of the fundamental barriers in terms of, it's even working with Study UK in terms of what should I be thinking of as a disabled student coming into a UK university? What should I be doing at point of entry or before? What should I be? So looking at that transitions checklist and making that available to any international student coming to the UK, so they have that ahead of coming to the UK. Having key people in the alumni network that can be experts in the space. So developing the website so it links to core resources, or creating a group of potential mentors that could be on hand. There are lots of things there. Obviously, we have to walk before we can run, so as to speak metaphorically. But it's, again, having like one thing at a time would be quite useful to do. As I said, I would like to develop the research, but that's from a personal point of view, because I think there's more to be done in that space. I think we've just started the journey, and I need to really voice the views of disabled alumni. Sorry, Maurie, over to you. I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Carol. From my side, I think this disability community of practice is a wonderful place for alumni to share knowledge and skills that disabled alumni can benefit from. Like I said, we can, for example, if this community has its own pages or groups or LinkedIn pages, I don't know, where different alumni and different professions can collaborate and write articles detailing skills needed by employers, how to develop them, where you can go study them, and also advice on employability skills, interview preparation, mentorship, and then constructing resumes. And I believe if we can have all of the different alumni on this prac community to participate in that, and all the shared knowledge resources, that will really assist greatly in disabled alumni succeeding in their careers and in their lives.
Thank you very much, Maurie. Phila, what's your ambition for the community of practice?
And to be honest, this community of practice is actually a place where to finally be seen and heard. I was waiting for this moment my whole life, to finally be able to share my story with many other students. And I hope to see and collect more stories about disabled students. And because I know every disability is different and every experience is different, and it's an amazing place to connect and to share. And yeah, I'm looking forward to many other opportunities.
Thank you very much, Bella, and thank you to all of our panelists, Professor Carol Evans, Maurie van den Heever, and Phil Labade. Thank you so much for your time today. Israel has mentioned in the chat, thanks to Shamail Abdullah, and I would like to underline that. Shamail has been the leader of this community practice. He's brought everybody together, set up the steering committee and our whole programme of events for the year. So very warm thanks to Shamail for all of that work. That's the end of this session. It's not the end of the programme for today, though, because we have our keynote in 15 minutes, which will be led by Dr. Ola Abu Al-Ghaib, who is the Director of Global Disability Fund, which is a UNDP-hosted multi-partner trust fund. So please do, after a break, stay on for that. Thank you very much again, Carol, Maurie and Phil. It's been a real privilege to listen to you today, and look forward to seeing you and everyone in the near future for our next event.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, Carol, and everyone. Thank you, Fela. And Shamail, thank you very much. It was really a privilege to be able to participate along with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for all the participants for staying with us. And again, massive thanks to Shamail and to Martin, actually. Let's have thanks to Martin as well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.